Do you love me, Your Majesty? They were alone in the library, surrounded by ancient texts and the smell of old parchment. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver patterns across the floor where they sat, closer than propriety allowed. She had thought this was safe, private, sacred even. He had been the one to invite her here, after all. Had spent months, 6 months, 2 weeks and 4 days, not that she'd been counting, seeking her company, sharing his thoughts, asking her opinions on everything from poetry to politics. He'd told her things he claimed he'd never told anyone. About the weight of the crown. About the loneliness of power. About the man he'd been before duty consumed him. She had been so sure. So desperately, foolishly sure. His expression shifted. Something cold slid behind his silver eyes, like storm clouds covering the moon. The warmth that had been there just moments ago, when he'd been reciting verse to her, his voice soft and intimate, vanished so completely she wondered if she'd imagined it. What did you say? Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. But she had come this far, had gathered every ounce of courage in her trembling body. I love you, Lysander. His name felt like silk on her tongue. She'd been too afraid to use it before, always calling him Your Majesty, even in private. I have for months, and I hoped that perhaps you felt something too. The way you look at me sometimes, the way you touch my hand when we read together, the way you sought me out again and again, I thought. The silence stretched, became something physical, something suffocating. Then his face closed completely, becoming the mask he wore in court. Every trace of the man she thought she knew vanished, replaced by the king, the stranger, the ice. You thought wrong. 3 words, quiet, final. Each one a blade sliding between her ribs. She couldn't breathe. What? You thought wrong. He enunciated each word carefully, as if speaking to a child who couldn't understand simple concepts. Whatever you believe you saw, whatever you convinced yourself was happening between us, it was a fiction of your own creation. But we've spent so much time together. You sought me out. You shared things with me. You told me about your mother, about the night you took the crown, about... I sought distraction. His voice was flat, empty. You provided it. Nothing more. She felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. The room spun. That's not true. I know it's not. The things you told me, the way you looked at me, the way you... Her voice cracked. 2 weeks ago, in the garden, you said I was the only person who truly understood you. You said... Ella. Her name in his mouth was sharp now, cutting. A reprimand, not an endearment. You are a minor courtier from a bloodline so thin it barely exists. Your great-grandfather was barely granted his title, and your family holdings consist of what? A minor estate producing modest crops? I am a king who will one day need to forge alliances through marriage. Powerful alliances. Did you truly, honestly believe there could be anything between us? Anything real? Each word was a hammer blow. Yes. The word was barely a whisper, broken and raw. I did, because you made me believe it. You made me think... Then you are a fool. He stood, adjusting his robes with precise, deliberate movements, creating distance, erasing the intimacy of moments ago when they'd been sitting close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. A romantic fool who confused a king's kindness for something it was never meant to be. Don't do this. Tears were burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. Please, Lysander, don't do this. Don't pretend what we had was nothing. We had pleasant conversations, intellectual discourse between a bored monarch and an admittedly intelligent girl. He moved toward the door, each step taking him further from her. That is all they ever were. I'm sorry if you misunderstood, but that failure of comprehension is yours, not mine. "You're lying," the words burst out of her. "You're lying right now, and I can see it. I know you, Lysander. I know when you're putting on the mask, when you're being the king instead of the man, and—" He whirled on her, and for the first time there was heat in his voice. Anger. "You know nothing about me. You know what I chose to share with you during moments of weakness, moments I now regret." He took a breath, visibly composing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was cold once more, controlled. "I think it best if we discontinue these meetings. I would not want you to continue laboring under such childish delusions." Childish delusions. The words burned like acid. "Please." She hated herself for begging, but she couldn't stop, couldn't let this end like this. "Please don't do this. What we have is rare, it's real, and I know you feel it too. I know you do. You can't fake the way you looked at me, the way you smiled when I walked into a room, the way your voice changed when you said my name. You can't fake that." "Can't I?" His smile was cruel. A king's smile, not the soft one she'd treasured. "I am a king, Ella. I have been trained since childhood to make people believe what I need them to believe, to make allies feel valued, to make rivals feel threatened, to make courtiers feel special when it serves my purposes." He paused at the door. "You were a pleasant diversion, a clever mind to engage with when the sycophants and power brokers became too tedious. But that is all you were, a diversion." The tears came then, hot and shameful, streaming down her face. "I don't believe you." "That is your choice, but it changes nothing." He opened the door, then paused, didn't look back at her. "And Ella, it would be wise not to speak of this to anyone. Such misunderstandings could damage your reputation considerably. People might think you'd been presumptuous, that you'd overreached, that you'd mistaken a king's casual kindness for genuine affection and made a fool of yourself." It sounded like advice, a warning from someone who cared. It was a threat from someone who didn't. "They would pity you, or worse, mock you. I would hate for you to become the subject of court gossip. So perhaps it's best if we both forget this conversation ever happened." He left her there, surrounded by books and the shattered remains of her heart. She sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to hold her. The sobs came in great, tearing gasps that felt like they were ripping her apart from the inside. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sounds, trying to hold the pieces of herself together. He had been everything, her first love, her only love, the person she'd opened her carefully guarded heart to. And he had just told her it meant nothing, that she meant nothing, that she was a fool. She stayed there for hours, crying until she had no tears left, until the moon had moved across the sky and the library was dark, until she was empty. And then, slowly, she stood, wiped her face, straightened her dress, and made a decision. If he wanted her to forget this happened, she would do the opposite. She would remember every moment, every word, every feeling. She would remember what it felt like to love someone who didn't love her back, to trust someone who betrayed that trust. She would remember, so she would never be so foolish again. 3 days later, the throne room. She thought he would keep it private, that even if he didn't love her, he had enough decency, enough humanity, to let her heartbreak remain her own, to let her heal in privacy and perhaps, eventually, rebuild some kind of dignity. She was wrong. She was so catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. "Approach, Ella Holloway." The king's voice rang through the throne room during morning court, cutting through the murmur of conversation like a blade. Every noble, every courtier, every guard turned to look at her. Her stomach turned to ice. Her blood went cold. Her hands started shaking. This wasn't scheduled. She had no petition before the throne, no reason to be called forward, no reason to be singled out in front of the entire assembled court. She was standing near the back, half hidden behind a column, hoping to be invisible. Hoping to get through this day without anyone noticing her swollen eyes, the pallor of her skin, the way her hands trembled if she didn't clench them together. Lysander sat on his obsidian throne, face impassive, silver eyes cold as winter stars. He looked magnificent and terrible, every inch the king. There was no trace of the man who had read poetry to her by moonlight, the man who had laughed at her observations and called her remarkable. And beside him, leaning close and whispering behind her hand with a smile that was all sharp edges, was Lady Morgana Ashvale. A rival who had always resented Ella's access to the king's library, his time, his attention. Whose pointed questions about Ella's frequent absences from court functions had grown more pointed recently. Understanding hit like a physical blow. Morgana must have seen them, must have been watching, spying, gathering evidence. Must have told the king that people were starting to talk, to speculate about his unusual interest in a low-born girl. That rumors were spreading, that his reputation, his precious political reputation, might be at risk. And Lysander, ever the politician, ever the king, had decided to end those rumors decisively, by destroying her. Ella walked forward on trembling legs, keenly aware of hundreds of eyes following her, assessing her, judging her. She could feel their gazes like physical touches, crawling over her skin. She knew what they were thinking, knew what they were wondering. Why would the king single out this nobody? She knelt before the throne because protocol demanded it, because refusing would only make things worse. But dread was a living thing in her chest, a monster with claws, shredding her from the inside. Please, she thought. Please don't do this. Please have mercy. But she could see it in his eyes. There would be no mercy. I have been informed, Lysander said, his voice carrying to every corner of the acoustically designed room, built specifically so the king's words would reach every ear, would carry weight and authority, that certain misconceptions have arisen regarding my interactions with members of this court. Oh no. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Her vision tunneled. She couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But he was. It has come to my attention that some have mistaken my kindness, my willingness to discuss matters of philosophy and literature with those of keen intellect, for something more personal in nature. She wanted to die, wanted the marble floor to open and swallow her whole. Wanted to disappear, to cease existing, anything to escape this moment. Let me be clear. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice took on an almost gentle tone, which somehow made it infinitely worse, the gentleness of a teacher correcting a particularly foolish student. I value intelligence wherever I find it. I enjoy discourse with those who possess sharp minds, regardless of their station. But such intellectual appreciation should never be confused with deeper sentiment. Someone in the crowd tittered. Just a small sound, quickly suppressed, but it might as well have been a scream. Lady Morgana's smile widened. Ella's nails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood. The notion that a king's casual mentorship of a minor courtier could be interpreted as romantic interest is... He paused, as if searching for the right word, as if carefully selecting the perfect dagger. A childish fantasy. The fevered imagination of youth, mistaking gratitude for something it was never meant to be. The tittering grew louder, multiple voices now, no longer suppressed. Laughter, soft and cruel, rippling through the throne room like poison spreading through water. Ella's face burned. Her whole body burned with humiliation so profound it felt like being flayed alive. I have been king for many years, Lysander continued, his silver eyes fixed on her, pinning her in place like a butterfly in a collection. And I have learned that kindness, when bestowed upon those of lesser station, can sometimes be misinterpreted. That accessibility can be mistaken for affection. That a moment of my time can be transformed, in desperate hearts, into something it was never intended to be. Lesser station. Desperate hearts. Each word was chosen carefully. Precisely. To cut, to humiliate, to warn. Such things are not for those born to thin bloodlines and provincial circumstances, no matter how keen their minds might be. His silver eyes met hers, and in them she saw nothing. No warmth, no regret, no acknowledgement of what they'd actually shared. No recognition of the nights they'd spent talking until dawn, the confidences exchanged, the moments of genuine connection. Nothing. He had erased it all. Rewritten their entire history into something small and pathetic and meaningless. I trust this clarifies any confusion that may have existed. I trust that those who may have been laboring under similar misconceptions will take this as a lesson. The king's attention is not an invitation. The king's kindness is not a courtship. And the king's choice of companions for intellectual discourse does not reflect anything beyond a desire for stimulating conversation. He was making her a cautionary tale, a public joke, a warning to anyone else who might dare to think themselves special to him, protecting his reputation, his political prospects, his precious alliances by destroying her utterly and completely. Lady Morgana's smile was vicious and triumphant. "You may go, Miss Holloway." Dismissed, not just from his presence, but from any hope, any dignity, any belief that what they'd shared had been real. Cast aside like garbage, like something shameful to be hidden away. She couldn't move at first. Her body refused to respond. She was frozen in place, kneeling before the throne, tears streaming down her face in front of the entire court. Finally, somehow, she stood. Her legs shook so badly she nearly fell. She turned, and the crowd parted for her. But their faces were no longer impassive masks. They were openly amused, pitying, contemptuous, gleeful at her downfall. The whispers started before she reached the doors, loud enough for her to hear, loud enough that she was meant to hear. Actually thought the king would want her. Ambitious little nobody. Least she knows her place now. Embarrassing herself like that. Throwing herself at him like some common, desperate thing. What did she expect? She walked faster, her vision blurred by tears, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The doors seemed miles away. The walk through the throne room felt like walking through fire, each step agony, each whisper a fresh burn. Finally, she reached the doors, stumbled through them, kept walking, walking. She didn't stop until she reached her small chambers in the far wing of the palace, the rooms assigned to minor courtiers like her, modest, forgettable. She collapsed on her bed and screamed into her pillow, screamed until her throat was raw, screamed out the humiliation, the betrayal, the devastating loss of everything she'd thought was real. She, Ella Holloway, had confessed her love in private, trusting the man she'd fallen for. And he had dragged that private moment into public light, twisted it, weaponized it, and used it to humiliate her before the entire court. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because people had noticed. And that was inconvenient for a king. Because his reputation mattered more than her heart. Because she was expendable. That night, she made two decisions. First, she would leave. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't survive in a court where everyone knew her shame. Where every glance held mockery. Where every whisper was about her. Second, she would never, ever give anyone that kind of power over her again. She would never again mistake kindness for love, attention for affection. She would never again trust a heart that wasn't her own. She would survive this, somehow. And one day, she would become someone who could never be dismissed, never be humiliated, never be made to feel small. She swore it on the broken pieces of her heart. Some betrayals are swift, a blade between the ribs. Others are calculated, designed not just to wound, but to warn, to make an example. to demonstrate that a king's reputation is worth more than any individual's pain. This is the story of a love offered in private and destroyed in public. This is the story of power wielded without mercy. This is the story of regret so profound it would echo through nearly 2 centuries, growing louder with each passing year, until it became the only sound a king could hear. 180 years later, desperation brought him back to her door. 180 years later. The withered spymaster's voice was barely a whisper, rasping like dead leaves. There is a healer in the free cities, my king. They call her the Light of Stillwood. They say she can mend souls themselves. Lysander barely heard him. He was staring at his sister, at Seraphine, dying in her bed. Black veins crawled across her immortal flesh like cracks in porcelain, like rot spreading through marble. The curse was devouring her from the inside, feeding on her joy, turning every happy memory into poison. His best mages had tried everything: ancient spells, forbidden rituals, blood magic. Nothing worked. The curse slid off their efforts like water off oiled stone. His sister was dying, and he was helpless. The healer, the spymaster continued. She was once of your court, my king, many years ago. A girl who went by her mother's name, Holloway. Her father's court name was Ashenmere, but— What? Lysander's head snapped up. What name? Holloway, Majesty. Ella Holloway. The name struck him like a physical blow, like a fist to the chest. The air left his lungs. Ella, the girl he had humiliated, the girl whose heart he had crushed, the girl he had publicly destroyed to protect his own reputation, the girl he hadn't thought of in nearly 2 centuries, or had tried not to think of, had buried the memory of, along with the uncomfortable guilt that sometimes surfaced in the dead of night. She can save Seraphine? They say she is the greatest healer in the known world, Majesty, that she can walk into souls and lead them back from darkness, that she can break curses that should be unbreakable. The spymaster hesitated. But Majesty, there are rumors that she does not forget old wounds, that she turns away those who have wronged her, no matter how much gold they offer. Lysander looked back at his sister, at Seraphine, who had been the only person in his life who truly loved him, who had tried to counsel him toward mercy all those years ago, who had warned him that cruelty always comes back to haunt you. He had not listened. And now, to save her, he would have to face the consequences of what he'd done, would have to kneel before the woman he'd destroyed and beg for mercy. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Prepare my carriage. The journey to Stillwood Vale felt like a descent into judgment. With every league, every passing mile, Lysander felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. Memories he'd locked away came flooding back. Ella's face when he'd called her a fool, the tears streaming down her cheeks in the throne room, the whispers of the court, mocking her, destroying her reputation on his orders. He had told himself it was necessary, that kings had to make hard choices, that he'd been protecting his political prospects, his future alliances. He had told himself many lies. The truth, which he'd never admitted even to himself, was simpler and uglier. He had panicked. What he'd felt for Ella had been real, had been growing into something he couldn't control, and that had terrified him. So he'd destroyed it, destroyed her, preemptively, viciously, publicly, because he was a coward. Stillwood Vale was aggressively, offensively alive. Buildings of living wood curved around ancient trees like embraces. The air smelled of earth and moss and 1,000 different herbs. Flowers glowed with soft bioluminescence. Everything was green and growing and vital. It was the opposite of his kingdom of eternal twilight, the opposite of his cold obsidian palace. It was a place of life, and he was a king of shadows. A calm-faced man met him at the entrance, powerfully built with amber eyes that held the weight of centuries. There was something ancient about him, something that spoke of deep roots and slow growth and unshakable strength. I am Bastion Thorncrest, The name was an old one, a powerful one. "You are a long way from Nighthallow, King Lysander." Not "Your Majesty," not "My Lord." Just his name, spoken with neither deference nor hostility, spoken as an equal. It had been a very long time since anyone had spoken to Lysander as an equal. "I have come for the healer, for Ella Holloway." Something shifted in the man's posture, something protective, possessive even. His amber eyes grew cooler. "Ella sees petitioners by appointment. Her work is draining, and she does not take surprises well." "This is a matter of life and death. My sister—" Lysander's voice cracked despite himself. "My sister is dying. A curse. The best mages in my kingdom cannot break it. I was told Ella could help." "Everyone who comes here believes their matter is life and death," Bastian replied, his gaze unwavering, measuring. "But for you, I believe an exception can be made." A pause, heavy, weighted. "She is expecting you." That surprised him, shocked him actually. He had prepared for tears, for rage, for frightened submission or righteous fury, for her to refuse to see him, for her to have him thrown out. He had not prepared for readiness, for foreknowledge. She knew he was coming. She had been waiting for him. Somehow that was more terrifying than any of the scenarios he'd imagined. They led him through winding paths, past gardens where impossible flowers bloomed, where herbs grew in intricate patterns, where the very air hummed with healing magic. The people they passed, humans, fae, others of mixed blood, looked at him with open curiosity but no fear. Here he was not a king. He was just another desperate soul seeking a miracle. His title meant nothing. His power meant nothing. For a man who had spent nearly 2 centuries being the most powerful being in every room he entered, it was deeply, profoundly unsettling. They arrived at a great hall built around a colossal silver-barked tree. The trunk was wider than his palace towers. Roots disappeared into the earth like ancient fingers. Branches spread overhead, creating a canopy of silver leaves that whispered with a sound like distant music. And there she was, standing with her back to him, grinding something in a marble mortar with slow, precise movements. Her dark hair was longer now, woven with living moon-petal vines that glowed faintly with their own light. A healer's mark, he realized, earned through sacrifice, through giving pieces of yourself to save others. 180 years had transformed her utterly. The girlish softness was gone, burned away. In its place was a woman's assured grace, strength that came not from power over others, but from mastery of self. Simple forest green robes couldn't hide the quiet authority in her posture, the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they were worth. She was no longer the trembling girl who had knelt at his feet, crying as the court mocked her. She was a queen in her own right, a queen who needed no crown. "Leave us, Bastian." Her voice was deeper, richer than he remembered, the voice of a woman entirely in her own power. No hesitation, no fear, no uncertainty. The change was staggering. Bastian placed a hand on her shoulder, brief, possessive, tender. The gesture of a man who had the right to touch her, who had earned that right through years of partnership and trust. The gesture sent something hot and unfamiliar through Lysander's chest, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. "Are you certain?" Bastian asked softly, his eyes flicking to Lysander, assessing, ready to protect her if needed. "I am." Such certainty in those 2 words, such absolute confidence. Bastian gave Lysander one last, measuring look, a look that said, "I know what you did to her. I know what you are. And if you hurt her again, I will end you, king or no," before departing. The silence he left behind was heavier than stone. Only then did she turn, and the breath caught in Lysander's throat. Her face was the same architecture of delicate bones he remembered, the same features he'd traced with his eyes in the library, in the garden, in stolen moments. But everything else was different. Her eyes, those deep, dark eyes that had once looked at him with such adoration, such trust, such devastating love, were calm, clear, unreadable. They held the quiet depth of an old forest. Ancient wisdom, hard-won peace. No fear, no anger, no love. Nothing. It was the most profound rejection he had ever experienced. Worse than hatred would have been. Worse than tears or rage or accusation. She looked at him the way one might look at a stranger in a market, with polite, distant curiosity, with complete and utter indifference. He didn't matter to her, not even enough to hate. The realization was devastating. King Lysander. Her use of his title was deliberate, a barrier, a reminder that whatever they'd once had, however briefly, however she'd believed in it, was gone. They said you would come. Ella. Her name felt strange on his tongue, like something he'd lost the right to speak. My sister, Seraphine, I know of the curse, she interrupted him without apology. A soul-eater, woven from forbidden blood magic, born from heartbreak given form. It binds to joy because it feeds on the absence of joy. That's why your mages cannot touch it. Traditional magic has no purchase on pure emotional anguish crystallized into curse work. She spoke as a physician diagnosing a disease, clinical, professional, not as a woman facing the man who'd shattered her heart and destroyed her reputation in front of the entire world. Can you help her? The question came out raw, stripped of all his usual pride and command, the plea of a brother, not a king. She wiped her hands on a cloth with precise, unhurried movements, walked to a table covered in celestial charts and diagrams of withered flowers. Her movements were economical, practiced, every gesture purposeful. To break a curse like this requires more than power. It requires fundamental understanding of life itself, of the delicate threads that bind a soul to its vessel, of the difference between existing and living. She paused at the table, her fingers trailing over a diagram. I spent 80 years after leaving your court studying under Master Theron in the Temple of the Eternal Breath, deep in the mountains where the air is thin and death walks close. I nearly died 7 times learning to channel life magic, a discipline most vampires avoid because it requires giving pieces of your own vitality with each healing. Most of us hoard our life force. I learned to give it freely. She turned to face him, and for the first time, something personal entered her eyes. Not warmth, but a cool, dispassionate clarity, the look of someone who has faced their demons and won. My thin bloodline, the weakness your court mocked me for, the thing that made me unsuitable for a king's affection, became my greatest strength. Pure bloodlines are too rigid, their essence too fixed, too crystallized. My diluted blood, my mixed heritage, allows me to work with life energy without it consuming me entirely. The flaw became the gift. There was no bitterness in her voice, just stating facts. Lysander felt something crack inside his chest. I must walk through your sister's memories, Ella continued. Find where the curse has anchored itself to her joy. Follow it down into the darkness. And then lead her soul back to the light. It is dangerous, exhausting. It will take everything I have, and there's no guarantee I'll survive it. I will pay any price. The words rushed out. Gold, territory, alliances, magical artifacts, name it. Anything you want, it's yours. She gave a small, sad smile that didn't reach her eyes, the smile of someone who has moved so far beyond you that they can afford pity. You still think in terms of transactions, don't you? As if everything has a price that can be paid in coin or power. As if you can buy your way out of anything. She turned to a single, perfect white flower blooming in a pot on the windowsill. Moonbell, he recognized. The same flower he'd once picked for her in the palace gardens before he destroyed everything. I will not do this for your gold, Lysander. I will not do it for your kingdom, or your alliances, or your magical artifacts, and I will certainly not do it for you. The words were quiet, spoken without malice or heat, stating simple fact. They struck him harder than any shouted accusation ever could. I will do it because Seraphine is an innocent soul trapped in a dying body. I will do it because healing is who I am now. It's what I became after I left your court. It's the purpose I found when I had to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. She looked back at him, her gaze holding his. It has nothing to do with who you are or what you did. You are simply the vessel that brought the patient to me. She moved to a cabinet, pulling out supplies. Glass vials, crystalline stones, dried herbs bound in careful bundles. Bring her to me, but understand this. You will be a guest in my home. You will abide by my rules. The king you are out there, she gestured vaguely toward the world beyond her sanctuary, has no power here. Here you are only the brother of the woman I am trying to save. Nothing more, nothing less. It was the most complete reversal of status he had ever known.
A stripping away of every shield.
Every layer of authority and power he'd wrapped around himself for nearly 2 centuries. 180 years ago, he had held her heart in his palm and crushed it without a second thought. Had destroyed her reputation, her dignity, her trust in love itself. Now his sister's life was in her hands, and she was making it devastatingly clear that the past, the connection he'd so carelessly, viciously severed, meant less than nothing to her now. He had come seeking a healer who was once a girl he'd known, a girl he'd broken. He had found a queen in her own right, ruling a kingdom of life and healing. And he was nothing but a beggar at her gates. 3 days later, Seraphine arrived in a carriage lined with preservation wards, cushioned with the softest silks, surrounded by the desperate hopes of a king who had run out of options. Black veins spread across her skin like necrotic roots, crawling up her neck, branching across her cheeks. Her immortal flesh had taken on the texture of old parchment. Her breath was shallow, labored, each inhalation a struggle. She was dying, truly dying, and the wrongness of it was staggering. Immortals did not sicken like this, did not fade. But the curse was devouring her from within, and there was nothing Lysander could do but watch. Ella was waiting at the entrance to the healing hall, serene and composed. Bastian stood at her side, solid and unshakable. Her eyes swept over Seraphine's frail form as the guards carried her in, and something flickered across her features. Compassion. Clinical, professional compassion. The empathy of a healer seeing suffering, but with the emotional distance necessary to do the work. She did not look at Lysander at all. "Take her to the central chamber," Ella commanded, her voice cutting through the hushed anxiety of Lysander's retinue. "Bastian, prepare the distillations of moonpetal and silverwood sap. I'll need the catalyst stones warmed to body temperature. And bring the resonance crystals. I'll need anchoring for the memory work. The deep diving." She moved with fluid efficiency, the master of her craft. Lysander could only stand by, useless and obsolete. The most powerful king in the known world, reduced to watching others work. They laid Seraphine on a bed of living moss in the heart of the great hall. Woven leaves formed a mattress beneath her. The silver-barked trees' roots pulsed with gentle light around them. The air hummed with latent power. Soft light filtered down from openings high in the canopy, dappling everything in silver and green. Ella approached the bedside, her fingers hovering over Seraphine's skin without quite touching. She closed her eyes, and Lysander felt the shift in the room's energy. Felt her extending some invisible part of herself, reaching out with senses he couldn't comprehend. "The curse is deep." Her voice was soft, distant, speaking to herself as much as to them. It has wrapped around her core like thorns around a rose stem, anchored itself to her memories of love and happiness. It's feeding on her joy, converting every bright moment into fuel for its hunger. She opened her eyes. They were weary, knowing. She'd seen curses like this before, Lysander realized, had fought them, had paid the cost. She looked directly at him. This will be a battle fought in her soul, in the space between thought and memory. I must go in, walk through her past, find the anchor points. But I cannot go alone. When you dive that deep, you need a tether to the waking world, an anchor, someone whose presence is constant, a beacon to guide you back. I will do it. Immediate, desperate, a chance to be useful, to matter, to do something other than stand helplessly by. Ella's gaze was skeptical, assessing, seeing right through him. Your presence is tumultuous, Your Majesty. Your emotions are a storm. Fear and regret and guilt and panic all mixed together. I can feel it from here, roiling off you like heat. She shook her head. I need calm, steadfastness, a quiet heart that won't distract me or pull me in wrong directions. Her eyes shifted to Bastian, who had returned with the crystalline vials. The look that passed between them was one of complete, unspoken understanding. Years of partnership. Trust built through shared trials. A conversation held in a single glance. Bastian will be my anchor. Another dismissal. Another reminder of his irrelevance. He, Seraphine's brother, the one who had loved her for centuries, was being sidelined for this provincial lord, this gardener king. He is not her blood. Lysander's voice came out harder than he intended. Blood is not the only bond that matters, Ella said quietly, turning her back on him to arrange the vials, setting up her workspace with practiced efficiency. And in this room, his magic is more stable than yours. His heart is quieter. His presence is steady. That is what I require to do this work. She didn't say it to wound him, wasn't trying to hurt him, just stating the requirements of her craft. But the truth of it was a deeper cut than any insult could have been. His heart was not quiet. It was a frantic, roaring mess of fear and regret and jealousy and guilt, of things left unsaid and damage done and time wasted, of opportunities destroyed and love rejected and cruelty that could never be taken back. He was forced to retreat to the edge of the chamber, to stand in the shadows while others worked to save the only person in his life who truly mattered. A king reduced to a spectator in the most important moment of his life. The healing began. It was nothing like the explosive theatrical magic of his court mages. No grand incantations, no dramatic gestures, no lightning or fire or impressive displays. It was silent, intense, deeply, profoundly intimate. Ella sat by Seraphine's bed, her hands resting lightly on her patient's forehead and heart. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed, deepened, synchronized with Seraphine's shallow gasps. Bastian stood behind her, his own hands on her shoulders, his eyes closed, becoming a conduit, a source of grounding energy for her to draw upon, an anchor to keep her from being lost in the darkness she was diving into. A soft, pearlescent light began to glow from Ella's hands, sinking into Seraphine's skin like water into parched earth. The air grew thick, heavy with effort, with the weight of magic that was not flash and power, but sacrifice and will. Hours passed. The sun set beyond the great tree. Bioluminescent flora throughout the hall began to glow, casting everything in ethereal blue-green light, creating an atmosphere that felt outside of time, outside of the normal world. Lysander did not move from his corner, could not look away. He watched Ella's face grow pale with concentration, with strain. Beads of sweat dotted her brow, her hands trembled slightly. Every few hours, Bastian would murmur something to her, too low for Lysander to hear, would gently wipe her brow with a cloth, would press a cup of water to her lips, helping her drink without breaking her trance. The gestures were so simple, so loving, so domestic. He was witnessing a partnership, a real one, built on trust and care and years of working side by side, of supporting each other through trials, of being each other's strength when your own failed. It was everything he'd never had, everything he'd rejected when he destroyed Ella all those years ago. And watching it now, seeing what she'd built without him, was its own special kind of torture. 4 days into the ritual, Seraphine's body began to convulse, violently. Her back arched off the moss bed, the black veins on her skin pulsed with malevolent light, spreading faster, reaching toward her heart. Ella cried out, her own body trembling with feedback, with the psychic backlash of the curse fighting back. "It's fighting back," she gasped, her face slick with sweat. "It has her trapped in a memory of despair, the darkest moment of her life. I can't reach her through it." Bastion's grip on her shoulders tightened, anchoring her. "You can, Ella. Breathe. Find your center. I'm here. I've got you." "I need more." Her voice was strained, desperate in a way he'd never heard from her before. A tether, something bright enough to cut through the darkness. A memory of pure joy from someone who knows her deepest happiness. Not power, not magic, just love. Pure, uncomplicated love. She opened her eyes, and they fixed on Lysander with sudden, blazing intensity. "Lysander!" His name was a sharp command, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. He was at the bedside in an instant, his careful distance forgotten. "What do you need? Tell me. Anything." "Your sister. Give me a memory. The happiest you ever saw her. Not a grand state occasion or a political triumph. Something small, real, true. Now!" He didn't hesitate, didn't think, just closed his eyes and dove into the past. Pushed past the recent memories of sickness and despair. Past the years of carefully maintained distance, of royal duties and political obligations. Past his own walls and defenses. Reached back through the centuries to a sun-drenched afternoon in the palace gardens long before he was king. When they were just children, really. When the world was simpler. Seraphine was barely more than a fledgling, her powers just manifesting. She'd been practicing shapeshifting for weeks, determined to master it. And that day, finally, she'd succeeded. She had transformed into a tiny, iridescent hummingbird, her wings a blur of rainbow light. And the joy on her face, the pure, unfiltered delight of a child discovering their own magic for the first time, had been incandescent. She'd zipped through the rose garden, drunk on nectar and sunlight and the sheer wonder of flying, making sounds of pure glee, no fear, no self-consciousness, no weight of expectation or duty, just joy. Simple, perfect, radiant joy. And he had laughed, a real, unburdened laugh, and chased her through the maze of flowers. They'd played for hours, just a boy and his little sister. Nothing more, nothing less. It was the last time he remembered being truly, completely happy. "The hummingbird," he said, his voice thick with emotion, tears streaming down his face. "In the rose garden. She had just learned to shift. She was so small, so bright, so free. It was before the crown, before duty, before everything became complicated. She was just happy. We both were." Ella's eyes were closed, but he felt her seize the image from his mind, felt her pulling it from him with a force that was almost painful, taking not just the memory but the emotion attached to it, the love, the nostalgia, the bittersweet ache of remembering when things were simple. She took it all and wove it into her magic. The light pouring from her hands intensified, shifting from soft pearlescence to brilliant gold. Warm, living. The color of sunlight and honey and summer afternoons. The golden light sank into Seraphine, flooding through her veins, pushing back the black rot of the curse. The darkness retreated from that brightness like shadow fleeing dawn. Seraphine's convulsions subsided. Her breathing, which had been ragged and desperate, deepened into the rhythm of peaceful sleep. Ella slumped forward, utterly spent. Every ounce of strength drained from her body. Bastion caught her before she could fall, his arms wrapping around her, holding her weight, supporting her completely. His chin rested on the top of her head. He was murmuring to her words of praise and comfort and love. "You did it. You're brilliant. You're incredible. I've got you. Rest now. I've got you." Lysander stood frozen just feet away. He had provided the key, the memory, the love. He had helped save his sister. But he was still an outsider. The intimate circle had closed once more, leaving him on the outside. Watching the woman he'd thrown away being held and cherished and loved by a man who was worthy of her. The silence in the room was absolute, but in his head, a single thought screamed like a soul in torment. What have I done? What have I done? What have I done? 7 days later. The fever broke at dawn. The last of the black veins receded from Seraphine's skin, fading like ink washed away by rain. Like a stain finally lifted. Color returned to her cheeks, the healthy blush of living flesh. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in months they were clear, bright, aware. "Brother?" The single word, whispered, was the most beautiful sound Lysander had ever heard. Relief so potent it was physically painful crashed through him like a wave. It buckled his knees. He gripped the edge of the bed to keep from falling, his legs turned to water. He couldn't speak, couldn't form words, could only nod, his throat tight with unshed tears. With gratitude and guilt and relief all tangled together, Seraphine was alive, was going to live, was saved. Ella stepped back from the bed, pale and visibly drained. The last week had aged her somehow, carved lines of exhaustion around her eyes. Her movements were slow, careful, the movements of someone who had given too much and was running on fumes. But her work was done. Bastian was instantly at her side, a steadying hand on her arm, guiding her gently toward a chair. She sank into it with a long, shuddering breath. The kind of breath you take when you've been holding yourself together through sheer will and can finally let go. The sheer exhaustion on her face was a testament to the price she had paid. Lysander wanted to go to her, to thank her, to say something, anything that might convey the magnitude of what she'd done, of what she'd sacrificed for someone she had no reason to help, for the sister of the man who destroyed her. But the sight of Bastian gently wrapping a blanket around her shoulders stopped him in his tracks. The man's movements were filled with such tender care, such practiced knowledge of what she needed. He knew exactly how to help her, exactly what to do. Because he'd been there before, through other healings, other crises. He knew her rhythms, her limits, her needs. Lysander had no right to intrude on that space. Had forfeited that right 180 years ago when he chose his reputation over her heart. 3 weeks later. As Seraphine slowly regained her strength, a strange domesticity settled over the healing hall. Lysander remained, unwilling to leave his sister's side. This forced proximity with Ella and Bastian became his punishment. He observed them constantly. The way Bastian brought Ella specific tea blends in the mornings without asking. The way she would touch his arm when she spoke, casual and comfortable. The way they communicated with glances, entire conversations happening in silence. He had wealth, but they had richness. He had subjects, but they had partnership. He had power, but they had love. He tried to talk to her once. Found her sketching alone on a high garden walkway. Night-blooming jasmine scented the air. "Ella, there are no words to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. I did it for her, not for you." "Nevertheless, I am in your debt." She set her sketchbook aside. "There is no debt. A healer does not put a price on a life. To do so would corrupt the very nature of the act. I was wrong, 180 years ago. What I said, how I acted, it was arrogance of a fool. An admission he'd never made. Her expression softened into pity, 1,000 times worse than anger. You were a king burdened by a crown you were learning to wear. Your court expected alliances, political marriages. I was a girl with an overwhelming heart and a bloodline offering nothing. We were what we were. No bitterness, only calm assessment of the past. as if about two other people. It was more than that. What you offered was genuine. I was too blind, too afraid to see it. She looked at him with clear, honest eyes. Yes, it was genuine. And what you gave me in return was the most valuable lesson of my life. You taught me that my worth was not something granted by another, especially not by a man who saw me as a childish fantasy. Your rejection forced me to find my own value, build my own power, become something other than a satellite in your orbit. You sent me away from your court, and in doing so, sent me toward myself. You think you broke me, Lysander, but you freed me. She picked up her sketchbook, conversation over. I should thank you. I would not be the woman I am today if not for your cruelty. Not forgiveness. A declaration of independence so complete it erased him from her narrative. He wasn't the great love who broke her heart, merely the catalyst for her true life to begin. He had been reduced from central figure to footnote. The thought was unbearable. A few days later, Seraphine was strong enough to walk. She leaned on Lysander's arm, her laughter real again. He saw Ella and Bastian watching from a balcony. Ella was smiling warmly. Bastian's arm was around her waist. He dropped a kiss on her temple. The image was perfect contentment. Seraphine followed his gaze. She is remarkable, isn't she? She is, Lysander agreed, his voice tight. I remember her from court. She followed you around like a lost puppy. We all thought it was sweet, but doomed. You were already so distant even then. She looked up at him. You hurt her badly, didn't you, brother? I tried to speak for her that day in the throne room, and you silenced even me. He couldn't meet her eyes. Yes. And now you regret it. I can see it in the way you watch her. It's like you're starving and she's a banquet behind glass. She is happy. He is a good man. He is, Seraphine agreed. He is what she deserves. A man who builds a garden for her, not a man who puts her in a cage, no matter how gilded. Some lessons, little brother, are only learned through loss. Perhaps this is one of yours. Departure Day. Seraphine embraced Ella at the Vale's entrance. I owe you my life. If there is anything you or your house needs from House Ravencrest, you have only to ask. Live a long and happy life, Seraphine. That is the only payment I require. Live fully. Love deeply. Don't waste the time you've been given. The words struck Lysander like arrows. Don't waste the time you've been given. His bags were packed, guards assembled. Time to return to his cold kingdom. He had what he came for. His sister was saved. He should feel triumphant. Instead, he felt hollowed out. He approached as Seraphine said goodbye to Bastian. Ella. King Lysander. Back to the title. The barrier. Is there truly nothing I can do to atone for the past? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was absolute. Final. Live with it. Live with it as I have. Let it be a reminder. Power is not the same as strength. A kingdom is not the same as a home. And a heart is not a toy to be broken for your convenience. She glanced at Bastian approaching, and affection lit her face like dawn. I found my home, Lysander. I found my purpose. I found love that doesn't require me to be less than I am. I found everything I needed. I hope, for your sake, you one day find yours. But her tone suggested she didn't believe he would. Bastian reached her side, and his hand found hers, fingers lacing naturally, perfectly. They stood together, a single, unshakable unit. We wish you a safe journey, Your Majesty, Bastian said politely but firmly. A dismissal. Then Bastian looked directly at Lysander, amber eyes holding quiet, ancient wisdom. I know what you did to her, King Lysander. I know what you threw away nearly 2 centuries ago. Thank you. Your loss was my greatest gift. I will spend every day of my immortal life grateful that you were too blind, too afraid, too concerned with your image to see what stood before you. Because your failure gave me the chance to love the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Genuine gratitude, it struck harder than any curse. Lysander bowed stiffly and walked away, not daring to look back. The entire journey to Nighthallow, he was silent. Seraphine tried to speak to him, but his responses were clipped, distant. His mind was trapped in the past. Re-examining every interaction, every conversation with Ella from 180 years ago. He had been given a gift, rare and precious and irreplaceable. And he had been too arrogant and too cowardly to accept it. He had demanded worship when she offered partnership, craved obedience when she offered love. He had been a fool. Back in his throne room, the obsidian walls drank the light. His throne felt less like power's seat, more like a cage of his own making. He was the most powerful immortal in the known world, and his existence felt like barren wasteland. He had his sister back, eternally grateful for that. But saving her had shown him the true depth of his own damnation. He had not just lost a potential lover, he had lost the chance to be a better man. 6 months later, an invitation arrived. Simple, elegant parchment smelling of lavender and wood smoke, the scent of Stillwood Vale. An announcement for the wedding of Ella Holloway and Lord Bastian Thorncrest, to be held in 3 months. Not a personal invitation, just a formal notice to all ruling houses. Political courtesy, a final confirmation, a door closing and locking for eternity. Seraphine found him in the library, invitation before him. You should not go. I was not planning to. I was not invited. Good. Her happiness is not for you to witness, brother. It is not your victory to share, nor your loss to mourn publicly. It is simply hers. She has moved beyond you, beyond the pain you caused. She has built a life that has nothing to do with you, and you need to let her have that. He didn't reply, just stared at the names linked together. Ella and Bastian. A perfect, simple truth. A life he would never be part of. He didn't attend, but he heard of it. His spies brought stories. They spoke of a ceremony in Stillwood's heart under the great silver tree, an intimate gathering of those who knew and loved the couple. They said the bride wore simple, deep green, with moon petals glowing in her hair. She looked like a force of nature, radiant and alive. They said her groom, Lord Thorncrest, wept openly when he saw her, that his ancient composure finally broke in the face of such joy. That he took her hands and spoke vows about building a garden together, about tending each other through seasons of growth and rest, about being earth and rain for each other for all the endless days ahead. They spoke of music and dancing and laughter, of light and joy and unadulterated happiness. A celebration of love, quiet, deep, and true. Love between two immortals who found in each other not just passion, but home for all the endless centuries ahead. Lysander sat on his throne, the reports before him, and pictured it. He could see her face lit by glowing flora, the smile that reached her eyes, the way she would look at Bastian with such trust, such love, such certainty. He could see the honest adoration in Bastian's eyes, the way he would hold her, touch her, speak to her with reverence and care. He could see the life they would build, a life of shared purpose and quiet moments, of tea in the mornings and hands held in twilight, of supporting each other's work, of being together without losing themselves. An eternity of partnership. And he finally understood, truly, completely understood. His eternal life, the thing he had prized above all else, was not a gift. It was a sentence. He was condemned to live forever with the knowledge of what he'd lost, what he'd destroyed, what he'd thrown away because he'd been too afraid, too proud, too concerned with maintaining an image, to recognize real love when it was offered. He would rule his kingdom of shadows, would accumulate more power, more wealth, more territory, would watch empires rise and fall, would see centuries and millennia pass. But his heart would remain exactly as it was now. A cold, empty chamber, haunted by the echo of a girl's brave confession in a moonlit library, and the ghost of the man he might have become if he had only been wise enough, brave enough, human enough to listen. The childish fantasy he had mocked had been the most profound reality he had ever been offered. And he would spend the rest of his very, very long life understanding that the greatest poverty is being a king of everything and a master of nothing that truly matters. Decades later. Years passed, decades, the kind of time that meant nothing to an immortal, but somehow felt like forever. And then, one morning, a package arrived, small, unassuming, wrapped in simple cloth smelling of earth and growing things. Inside, a single pressed moon petal, still glowing faintly even in death, and a note in Ella's elegant hand. He recognized her handwriting immediately. Some things burn themselves into you so deeply that time can't erase them. For Seraphine, who deserves to remember joy, may she keep this as a token of the day she was given back her life. With respect, Ella Thorncrest. Not for him. The gift was explicitly for his sister. But the message was clear, devastatingly clear. Ella had moved so far beyond him that she could now afford him kindness. Not the kindness of forgiveness, because forgiveness would imply she still thought about what he'd done, still carried the wound. The kindness of utter indifference. He meant so little now that she could send a piece of her wedding day into his home without a second thought. Without fear that it would hurt him. Without concern for his feelings. Without even considering how he might react. Because he simply didn't matter anymore. She was free. Free of the pain. Free of the anger. Free of him. And he was trapped. Trapped in the past. Trapped in his regret. Trapped in the knowledge of what he'd done and what it had cost him. He looked out from his high window at the eternal twilight of his kingdom, the realm he'd built on power and fear and calculated control. And for the first time in centuries, the king of Nighthallow felt truly, completely alone. His regret was a quiet, constant companion now, a shadow that followed him through every corridor, that sat beside him on his throne, that whispered in the silence of his chambers. A curse of his own making. And unlike his sister's curse, unlike the soul-eater that had nearly destroyed her, this one would never be broken. Because there was no healer in all the realms powerful enough to mend a heart that had been destroyed not by magic, but by its owner's own choices. No spell to undo time. No ritual to take back words spoken in cruelty. No magic strong enough to resurrect love that had been murdered in front of witnesses. He would live forever, and every single day of that forever he would remember, would see her face in the library, trusting and hopeful and brave, would hear his own voice dismissing her, mocking her, destroying her, would feel the weight of the choice he'd made, to protect his image, to maintain his power, to choose being a king over being a man, would know that somewhere, in a sanctuary of living wood and glowing flowers, Ella Thorncrest lived a life of purpose and love and joy. A life that had nothing to do with him, a life built on the ashes of what he'd destroyed. And he would rule his empty kingdom, surrounded by subjects who feared him, and courtiers who served him, and guards who obeyed him. But never again would anyone look at him the way she once had, with trust, with love, with hope that he might be worthy of those gifts. He was a king, and he was alone, and he would be alone forever. That was the real curse, the one he'd cast on himself 180 years ago when he'd chosen wrong. When he'd been given a chance at something real, something precious, something that could have saved him from his own cold perfection. And he'd laughed at it,